My name is Sakshi Venkatraman. I am a junior here at NYU, and I was the editor-in-chief of WSN last year, the 2019 calendar year, so I'm officially retired. But just a little bit about WSN for the people in the audience who don't go to NYU. WSN is NYU's independent student newspaper. It was started in 1973. Right now, it has a staff of around 50 editors and like a larger circle of maybe 150 contributors and staff members. As with print media, local media, all media really, WSN has been struggling to stay afloat for a long time. As editor-in-chief, I sat in meeting after meeting with people who told me that the newspaper was in peril, that it wouldn't survive. And then I had to go back to my staff of 50 editors and be an uplifting and encouraging presence when I didn't really even know if what we were working on was going to last until the next year. And as someone who has seen things from the inside, I want to tell you how hard it is to watch something that I love so much struggle to stay afloat. When I was editor-in-chief with WSN, I was in our office for about 50 hours a week. I had another part-time job that I was at for 10 hours a week, and I was kind of a student on the side at that point. And there are dozens of editors, writers, photographers, designers who work there now, who put so much of themselves into the newspaper just like I did, and hopefully this event will make their lives a little bit easier. And now that I'm no longer involved with the paper, and I'm sleeping, and I'm just a reader, I can see more clearly the impact and the necessity that WSN has on the student body of NYU. NYU is the largest private institution in the United States. So obviously, its student newspaper really has its work cut out for it. When I was on staff, we informed the NYU community about things that the university was not forthright on. 2 dining halls failing health inspections, systemic issues of racism and Islamophobia in the Stern School of Business, and the labor abuses on the NYU Abu Dhabi campus. We also shed light on student resources that NYU under-advertised, like the Courtesy Meals program, which, when NYU debuted it, had about 50 users that semester. And since we have been reporting on it for the last 2 years, it's gone up to about 4,000. And that serves food insecure students on campus. And those are just the stories that we did when I was on staff, but now there's a bigger, better group of students who are at the helm, putting aside their lives right now for student journalism. And I want to shout out the current editor-in-chief of WSN, Cole Stallone. He's in the back, if you want to wave. So that's what we're here for, the students who are really putting their all into this and are struggling to stay afloat still. But hopefully this will make a bit of a dent and do a little bit for them to give more resources to journalists who are just starting their careers. I also want to say thank you to a few people who made this happen. Ted Conover, who's the director of the journalism department, was instrumental in putting this together. He let us have the 7th floor space. He donated the alcohol and the food, which is much appreciated, obviously. And so because of that, all the proceeds from this event, including the book sales, we have some books for sale in the back that Ta-Nehisi generously donated, and the ticket sales, all of those proceeds go to WSN and to supporting student journalists at NYU. Miriam Bernstein, who's in the back, she's one of the busiest people I know, and as someone who worked like 60 hours a week last year, it's definitely saying something that Miriam worked so hard, and she put so much of her time into planning this since the beginning, so none of us would be here without her, and I'm very appreciative of her. Nancy Healy's also back there next to Marion. She's wonderful. She's WSN's advisor. She's been like advising WSN for years, I think, and she's with the Center for Student Life. She's amazing. She was someone who was such a support system to me when I was editor-in-chief, and she doesn't get enough credit, so Nancy Healy, she's over there. Yvonne Laddie and Hilka Shellman. Hilka isn't here because she just had a baby, but Yvonne Laddie is right there. She is the chair of the board of WSN. She was a huge encouragement for putting on this event. She's wonderful. They care so much about the paper. We wouldn't be here without them. And Ta-Nehisi's assistant, Octavia, couldn't be here tonight, but she was so helpful in putting this together as well. And of course, I want to thank Ta-Nehisi for donating his time and his books, and for making room in his busy schedule to be here. I promise I'm going to stop talking soon. just a couple of reminders before we begin. You're welcome to take candid photos throughout, but I want to politely ask that nobody asks Ta-Nehisi for selfies or post photos. You can ask me for a selfie if you want, though. Now that all of that is out of the way, I'm so happy to introduce one of my inspirations in journalism, somebody who is a journalist of color, really inspires me. He's a renowned author and journalist, and also an NYU Distinguished Writer in Residence. In September, he came out with his first novel, The Water Dancer. Professor Ta-Nehisi Coates, everybody. Thank you so much for being here again. I want to talk about your new novel for sure, even though I'm sure you're probably tired of doing press for it at this point. But I won't ask too much about that. I want to start, since this is an event by student journalism for student journalists, I wanted to ask about your experience as a young journalist and someone just getting started in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this was because my student newspaper was actually instrumental in my career. I worked at, I went to Howard University in DC. I worked, that always happens. I worked for the Hilltop there. And that was really where I did my first journalism. And I remember, how foundational and how formative those experiences were for me. I would argue that your work actually at least, well, let me not overstate. For me, my work at the student newspaper actually was much more important than any journalism class I took. I actually didn't take any journalism classes. I just worked at the student newspaper. Even like, because I had trouble paying when I was in school. So some semesters I was out, I snuck and still worked for the student newspaper anyway. It was that central to my life. And so for me, that experience was actually probably more formative than my class experience, because it's, in the newspaper where I actually got to practice. And I firmly believe that the basics of journalism are pretty simple to teach, but very, very difficult to master. And so you need as much practice as possible. So.
Yeah. So when you were first getting started as a writer and as a journalist, what was it like to find your niche? Was that something that came naturally to you, or what did it take for that to happen?
Yeah, I wasn't a natural reporter. I wasn't. I was somebody who probably, I don't know what I thought I was going to be. I think I thought I was going to be a rock critic or something, or hip-hop critic or something like that. But after I worked at the Hilltop, and then I got this internship at an alternative newspaper in DC, very much like the Village Voice, which used to be right up the street from us, where I also worked right up the street. And I had an editor there by the name of David Carr, and he went on to make quite a reputation as a writer, but as an editor was just absolutely brutal. And, very, very much stressed our reporting. And so just the awkwardness of having to go up to people randomly and ask them questions was not something that came natural to me. But you just do it enough times and then it's okay, this is the job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what was your experience like working at community newspapers? Because obviously now community journalism and local journalism in cities and towns is dying. So tell me about your thoughts on that.
I mean, it was foundational. So when I worked at City Paper, I covered local DC politics. We had this rule: you couldn't cover the city as a federal city. You were supposed to cover local DC. So the only time you ever wrote about anything that was happening in the federal government was when they were doing something to local DC. And so that was a very, very different perspective, because I wasn't from DC, I was coming in from Baltimore. And so it forced me to look at the city as a conglomeration of neighborhoods. It was very, very different than how most people looking outside see Washington, DC.
Right.
And so, no, it was foundational, having to go to council meetings, having to go to, they used to call them A&C meetings. This was like an unelected office for neighborhood councils. Having to do that, having to go and talk to people and ask them, and have them, explain to me the difficulties of, say, getting a grocery store, in a particular neighborhood, or getting a sit-down restaurant. All of that was like deeply, deeply formative for me. It also really honed my story sense, because there was this, that was the first place I ran into this word counterintuitive.
Right.
So like you couldn't, where I was, like you couldn't go out and say, here's a story about a neighborhood organization that's doing good things. Like you had to find some sort of twist or some sort of, weird thing. And I think that more than anything, stayed with me.
Right, yeah. And so the loss of these community papers and organizations that serve like a small area of the community, like the Gothamists, DNA Info, those publications have shut down, and I mean all over the country, not just in New York City. What do you think that does to cities and towns?
Yeah, see, I'm old enough to remember when people thought like Gothamists and DNA Info, not that they were a problem, but that they were insufficient.
Right.
Given that before that you had actual newspapers, I think it obviously presents a huge knowledge problem.
Right.
I think one of the big problems with media, and I guess one of the big problems with America, period, is things that cannot be made to turn a profit or make somebody rich are usually going to have a hard go. And not even make somebody rich. Usually it's things that won't increase, shareholder value at a particular point that people set out. If you can't do that in this country as it's structured right now, you're going to have problems. And so I think a lot of what plagues media right now is not separate from what plagues the larger country.
Yeah. So obviously now it kind of seems like you have to be able to afford it to be informed, like to buy a subscription to the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or whatever it is. Do you think that news should be free?
No, I don't. Well, let's see. Well, how would we define free? I think that someone should pay.
Right.
It's not clear to me that the reader should pay. Maybe the reader should pay. I'm not totally against that. But I don't think it should be free in the sense that no one pays for it. I don't even think it should be. I think actually the ad model is bad.
Yeah.
I don't know if we as a larger society need to, recognize media as a public good. Obviously, if you're talking about government, that presents, some sort of, problems, even though we kind of have that, in some situations. I don't know if they, what's going on right now is basically you have big billionaires,
right.
Buying up, properties. Well, I used to work at the Atlantic, obviously acquired by somebody, the Washington Post. But that in itself presents problems.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because even, these folks at their most benevolent, like a buddy of mine, once said, they're only one tumor away. Like one brain tumor away from totally flipping, and then, suddenly you got Trump, running the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And so I don't, I'm not an expert in terms of pay models, models for subsidizing, but I do believe that journalism is really hard work. I do believe people deserve to make a living at it. I do believe someone should pay.
Yeah. So, are there any publications right now that you keep up with daily?
I read daily. I read the Times. I'm pretty boring. I read the Times, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, like The Cut, loyal The Cut reader. I read this blog called Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I peek at a slate, from time to time. But I'm actually really working hard. Obviously I read the New Yorker. I'm really working hard to get myself back into books.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because one of the problems with the internet, and I think this was not as true before the internet, is because you have endless space. There's so much information that is not actually information.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's words, but what did I get out of that? Did I actually, learn something about the world? Because information is expensive,
Mm-hmm. What about when you were growing up and starting off as a writer? What publications or writers, whether that be books or newspaper style, inspired you?
Yeah, so there was this guy at the Washington Post who was a music critic at the time, Richard Harrington, and he was probably the first person I saw writing in a newspaper. But I said, I kind of want to be like him. My dad, believe it or not, in Baltimore really liked the New York Observer and would get the New York, but this was a different New York Observer. Very, very, there are people who are my age, maybe actually a little older might remember, actually being a very different paper. My dad really liked the New York Observer and would get that when he came to New York. He really liked the Wall Street Journal. So he was the first person I learned, like before I even went to college, I learned about percent of column and all of that. You know, Washington Post, I would read that. And I have books all over my house. I just have a ton of books, you know, all over my house. When I went to work at City Paper, that's when David really pressed, you know, the idea of reading the New Yorker, keeping up with Vanity Fair, GQ, you know, those sorts of publications that were running would be, you know, then called literary journalism.
Mm-hmm. This might seem like a basic question, but I wanted to ask a little bit about what you think the role of the press and the media is right now. Obviously, it's like a weird political moment, but there's also this notion of like media objectivity and things like that, that you're trying to find the balance between reporting on someone like Trump and maintaining the sense of objectivity, whatever that means.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably do need objective media, but I think objective isn't, you said the sky was blue, I said it was pink.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? Then putting it in the newspaper like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that isn't, you know, that's facilitating a lie. That's actually stenography.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're doing. And anybody really can do that. I think a lot of major publications are not used to having a situation where people with so much power blatantly lie. Now, they've always lied, okay, let's just be clear about that, right? But to, like, blatantly, like, there's gonna be a vaccine for coronavirus in 3 months, like, to say that, you know what I mean, just to straight up, you know what I mean? Like, that is new and kind of, well, relatively new in this modern era of politics, and, I mean, that puts people in a very uncomfortable position of doing something they're not really trained to do. Mm-hmm. And that's to say, you know what I mean, risk either, as I said, being a carrier of that lie, you know what I mean? Or, you know, having to call somebody out, which is not something that most, you know, reporters, you know, actually, you know, want to be doing. And probably something that they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
You know, but it's tough, man. I mean, I think, you know, Trump really figured out the hole in mainstream media. He figured it out. You know, he figured out that if media really has these kind of, you know, contentless values of, you know, objectivity, of pretending that following the story is some sort of artificial intelligence that they have no sort of decision in. Mm-hmm. For instance, you know, when Trump was running, giving him, you know, constant airtime, actually was somehow not a decision made by programmers, but was some, you know, some higher theory they were following. I think, you know, once he figured that out, I mean, who's to stop him from lying? Yeah. And perhaps the more depressing fact is there is some percentage of Americans that want to be lied to. I mean, that can't be, you know, that is, people don't like saying that. It is much more comfortable to believe you live in a democracy where, you know, as most of our politicians say, the people are right and the people are good. I strongly suspect that the people are human, and all humans at certain points like to be lied to. That's not a, you know, a particularly unusual or like, you know, necessarily in and of itself damnable quality. It's a real thing, but so much is premised on the idea that if you provide people with the right information or enough information, they will then make the correct choice. Mm-hmm. But see, I started my career just when the internet was really, you know, picking up, 1996, right? So I remember what it was like when there was no internet. I cannot explain to you how much more information there is available for free right now as compared to when I was your age. Right. I mean, it is like, so I'm a huge, I don't know, like when I was a kid, like they used to have Saturday morning cartoons, right? Mm-hmm. And you would see something and it'd be a cartoon you'd like, and then one day it would just disappear. And no one would tell you why. It would just be gone. There wouldn't be fan campaigns because no one knew what had happened. Except somebody that worked in some network somewhere. Like, you know what I mean? Like the people who knew, it was like a handful of people. And there was, you know, maybe it was reported in some trade journal somewhere, but you just didn't know. You just didn't know. Now something gets canceled, their ratings, you know, people are rallying, you know what I mean? It's a very, there's so much information available. And so you get to an issue, like say climate change. It's very, very serious. I mean, the problem with climate change is not a lack of information. it's right there. It's not hard to access for people who don't want to know. But what do you do when there is, I'm not saying everybody, but when there's a critical mass of people within a society, within a democracy, who would prefer to be lied to? Who just like who want to believe that there's going to be a vaccine in 3 months. I mean, what do you do when that's the situation? That's a very, very difficult thing. And so I think in that sense, we almost have to be careful of what we ask of journalism. It can't cure the world. It can't make, human beings escape, the bonds of being mortal or whatever.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to transition a little bit, and speaking of national politics, I want to ask a little bit about reparations and the new sort of conversation that has started with the recent election, or with the upcoming election. This is a bill that's been introduced in the House since like 1989 or something like that. Yeah. You wrote the case for reparations in 2014, but this has been coming up in the most recent debates and things like that. When establishment people like Beto and like Tom Steyer talk about getting reparations passed, do you think that that's something, I mean, I guess we don't really know if that's something that they're serious about, but when the Democratic establishment seems to support it, is that progress?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's just not the end.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely progress. I mean, Nixon, eventually adopted the language of affirmative action.
Right.
I don't know that folks should be congratulated. I don't know that they should be applauded. I don't know that, those of us who have been agitating should then, say, oh, the fight is obviously over.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you got to remember, man, when I wrote that story, Reparations was a Dave Chappelle skit. Like, people just sort of laughed at it. And I'm not saying that, like, you know what I mean? Like, I reversed that. What I'm trying to say is there has been a critical mass, a movement of people to make that not the case.
Mm-hmm.
But people just sort of, it was like something you just laughed off, And I was really, really fortunate when I went to write the story that there had been, so much research already done, where a lot of the groundwork was layered. And so, I've said this before, like when I was writing that story, my main thing was to get people to stop laughing. You know what I mean? Like for me to say, or anyone to say reparations, and you ain't got to agree with it, but you can't look at me like, reparations for what? You know what I mean? That was the goal, to get people to not, make jokes about black people getting rims or whatever,
right.
Folks were saying.
Yeah, so do you think that people are serious about, like, getting it passed?
Like the people at, like
the
Steyer,
people talking
like
about,
people
yeah,
like that?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
Yeah, right.
Who knows?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think people in politics, in general, do what they're forced to do.
Yeah.
So I think the real question is, will there be a point where enough power is leveraged to make something like that happen?
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't count on their sincerity. Like, that's not,
right.
Even if they are, I just wouldn't bet on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this sort of leads into the next question that I had, and you sort of answered it. But since you wrote the case for reparations in 2014 and you testified before Congress last year, I think, do you think, how have you seen the discourse changing since you first started to talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think people take it a lot more seriously. I mean, like, one of the things when I wrote that story was, and I have to stress, like, it really had to be a story. It couldn't be like an opinion. Like, it couldn't just be an opinion. Obviously, it was an opinion, but it couldn't just be. And this is like the power of journalism. And I don't know that we always see this, even though I just talked about the limits of it. It's one thing for me to line up all of the facts and all of the history and say, this is why reparations is justified. It's another thing if I go to the west side of Chicago, Lawndale, and I find a 92, 93-year-old black dude, and I say, him, right there. Mm-hmm. He's gonna tell you exactly what happened to him. And this program that, you know what I mean, made all of your parents rich and allowed you to grow up in the suburbs, it happened at his expense, and he's still there, and he's still broke. When you do it like that, people have a tough time looking at somebody. Like, they can look at slavery, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And say, well, that was a long, but when the person's right there, you know what I mean? It becomes and that's the power of journalism versus history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It becomes much, much harder to write off.
It's much harder to separate yourself from something that exists now.
That's
because
right.
a lot of people write off, like, slavery happened a long time ago.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah.
So, let's see. I do want to ask a little bit more about your process as a writer, leading into talking about The Water Dancer, even though I know you don't want to talk too much about it. So this is kind of a weird question, but do you have any like rituals or processes that you do when it comes to writing a new work, or where do you formulate your ideas? What does that look like?
No, I don't.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I just read a lot. I talk to people.
That makes sense, yeah.
I don't.
When you were younger.
It's not very mystical.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's just a laptop.
Fair enough,
I mean,
yeah.
you know.
When you were younger and you were trying to find what you wanted to write about, because obviously most people know you're writing from, or I mean, most people know your books, but most people know your journalism or your writing from The Atlantic, writing some very specific topics. How did you find your niche in that way? Like what you actually wanted to center yourself on?
It came out of who I was.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in West Baltimore, you know, in the crack era, in a very violent time, in a very violent neighborhood. Went to a very violent school, you know, in middle school, and I just wanted to know why my world was one way. Mm-hmm. And all the black people I knew's world was that way. And when I cut on TV, it was Family Ties and Mr. Belvedere. Like, what was going on? What explained the gap? And so I was ferociously motivated, like, to understand that. Right. So it wasn't, it really wasn't hard. You know what I mean? It was like a question I went to bed thinking about, you know, and woke up thinking about. And, you know what I mean? When I walked around, you know, through the neighborhoods, I thought about it. You know, because there's an entire mythology. You know, it's like you seen the Truman Show? You ever seen the Truman Show? You know how he can like sense that it's fake? Mm-hmm. Like he's like looking around and people are putting on a kind of show for him, and he's like, this doesn't look quite right. And you know, once in a while he gets a peek behind the curtain and he thinks he sees things. That's what it's like to be black in America. Because people are telling you things. They are putting on a show for you. They're saying you live in this poor neighborhood. And, you know what I mean, there's all this murder in these neighborhoods, there are all these guns, because something is wrong with you. And you're like, okay, that could be true, but something is just not adding up here. And you don't know what it is, because for the most part, no one is in a hurry to tell you. Because if it's not you, so you gotta remember, we live in America. We don't live in, even France or England. We live in a country that premises itself on having been a revolutionary republic and, you know, oldest democracy, still currently going. And if you hail from a group that is exempt from that, and not just exempt from that because this is what lies behind the curtain, but that exemption made the freedom possible, it just calls everything into question. Yeah. You know, so I really, really wanted to know why was this not adding up? Yeah. What was the math? Like what was going on? It didn't quite make sense. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I was just thoroughly motivated by that. Right. And is that part of the reason, I mean it seems like it kind of answers itself, but you're a history person and is that why? That is why. That's because, like anything else, you would reconstruct the story. You try to figure out, okay, what exactly happened here? You know, but the mode for telling the story I found was much more effective as journalism. Yeah, and to go a little bit into The Water Dancer because that's fine. You can ask about it. I don't want you to feel like you can't ask about it. No. This is a story that you created that is set in a historical period that you've studied. What was it like? Like creating this, having studied that? What liberties were you comfortable taking? What were you uncomfortable with? Yeah, like this, I don't know if this will make sense, but you can change facts, but you can't lie. So you can change how people looked, how, who was related, like you can do that, but you can't like you can't have happy enslaved people. Like that's a lie, you know what I mean? Like that's an actual, you know what I mean? Like that bends the actual historical reality of what was actually happening. It was hard. It took 10 years to get it done. It was really hard.
Yeah.
I was afraid that I couldn't do it. I think the streets are littered with the bodies of journalists who tried to write novels. It is not a particularly dignified and honorable tradition. It's a pretty poor and disreputable and unliterary tradition. And so trying to, write just a decent book, like a not bad book. You know what I mean? Like that weighed, I didn't want to suck. That was a nightmare. Like, this sucks. You know what I mean? Like, that was like a huge thing weighing on me,
Yeah.
So it was hard. It was very hard. I rewrote it like 4 times.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, 3 or 4, something like that.
Okay, so we're running low on time, but there is one more question that I wanted to ask. I think working even in journalism on a small scale at the student newspaper, I've seen how much privilege financially it takes to work in this industry now. When it comes to, like, now young journalists have to have like the entire Adobe Creative Cloud, like it's ridiculous. And one of my priorities on the newspaper was making it a place where young journalists of many socioeconomic backgrounds could come and start their careers, but it seems like it's something that's increasingly hard to do.
How much is the Adobe Cloud?
It's a lot. I think it's like $99 a month or something to get the whole thing. Like, it's very expensive.
And you guys need that.
And we need that, yeah. And thankfully, like, NYU offers that to us, but not everybody goes to NYU who wants to be a journalist. Do you have any advice for young journalists of color, journalists who come from working class backgrounds who want to get started in the industry but don't know how?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to, and I'll be real frank with you. Unless, if you're coming from somewhere where you are not of means, unless it's being paid for you, I would not come here.
Right.
I wouldn't. I think.
Like to New York, or?
I might not come to New York, but I certainly wouldn't come to NYU.
Right.
I'm just being real. Like, I just had to be absolutely real about this. And I want to be clear about this. If you have to pay for it, if you have to pay for it, I want to be real clear about that. Because journalism just isn't going to pay much. It just won't. It's a really, I mean, there's a select few. If you get to a certain place and you get lucky, you know what I mean? And I emphasize lucky. I feel lucky. You understand? Because there are plenty of talented, hardworking, smart people. You know what I mean? Everything the ball don't bounce just because you're working hard and you're smart and et cetera. It costs too much. I had to, and maybe this was just me, but I had to live poor for so long. If I had $200,000 on top of me that I owed somebody, like I don't know what I would have done. It would have crushed me. It would have absolutely destroyed me. I think you need to seek as many opportunities as you can to practice, wherever you can, however you can. And I guess, NYU offers that. I guess any J school offers that. But I think, the reality of it is, however you got to do it, man, you got to find somebody else to pay you for it, as opposed to you paying somebody else for it.
Right.
I understand that that's not what the system looks like right now. I think you should think about being a journalist the way people go into Hollywood think about being actors and singers. I think it's that sort of profession. I think it's not, and this is just what I found. Maybe, I don't know, maybe other folks find it more stable, but I mean, it was like a dream for me. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It basically was like, chasing a dream. And, I'll admit, it was, so I came to New York in 2001. So like the arts was like my period here of trying to, make it. And I lost like 3 jobs. I used to work over here at the Village Voice. I got pushed out of the Village Voice. Before that, I worked at this alternative newspaper in Philadelphia, got the boot out of there, worked at Time Magazine, got kicked out of there. You know what I mean? And luckily landed at the Atlantic. Luckily, I could have been driving a cab. That's what I wanted to do. You know what I mean? My wife was like, you ain't driving no cab. But that's what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm done. And so I think you got to really husband your resources. You know what I mean? You got to be really, really careful and find as many opportunities where you can report and you can write, and not just write commentary on things. That's the other thing. Like that's not really working your muscles. You know what I mean? Where you can report and write, as much as you can. And if you can't get paid for it, at least try to find some way to not pay somebody else for it. You know what I mean? If you get a scholarship, if you get, financial aid grants and you're able to do it, that's fine. I feel really, really strongly about this. I feel real strongly because it just don't pay enough.
Right.
It's not like being a doctor. It's not like being a lawyer ain't even like being a lawyer anymore. It just doesn't pay enough. How's that for a pitch for NYU school?
No, it's true.
But take my class if you're here. Please do. No, because we spend a lot of time talking about that. That's like, you know what I mean? We're supposed to be talking about other things, but a lot of that is, so what's going to happen when you get out,
yeah, and also the people that are able to get into this industry shape the stories that are being told through
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
And by the way, it was always hard for people who did not have money. This is not new. So when I was, and maybe it's still like this, but for instance, when I always wanted to work in magazines, no magazines had paid internships.
Yeah. Still don't.
Yeah, so it was always this way. So if you're a kid coming out of West Baltimore who dreams of working for how are you gonna do that? You know what I mean? There's a bunch of them here in New York. How are you gonna afford to live in New York and work for free?
Right.
Like who can do that? You know what I mean? Clearly, only certain people. So these are structural problems. These are real structural problems. It used to be that, kind of alternative newspapers sort of filled that void, and they were kind of like, J schools in and of themselves, but I don't know. The industry is not, the field has not done the best job of making sure that it's cultivating a diverse, and by diverse, I don't just mean, ethnicity or gender, because income is really, so much of it, and I mean geography too.
Right.
A really diverse class of journalists. I don't think we've done enough thinking about that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much. We're gonna open it up to an audience Q&A. People will be coming around with mics to take some of your questions. So if you have a question, just put your hand up and someone will maybe come around to you.
Hi, my name is Sydney. I actually had the privilege of seeing you at the History Talks this past Saturday. And
oh yeah, where I said I was scared to die. Yeah.
Yes. And it was a great conversation. And I got to go for free, so I was extremely happy that I was.
How much did they charge?
It was the cheapest ticket was $287.
Oof.
Yep. Talking about privilege, guess who was in the room? Because I was only there because it was free. But I actually want to talk. I have 2 or 3 questions.
$287.
Okay. Yeah, $287. I went because it was free. I would have not been in the room had it not been free. But actually, I rewatched the hearing for the case for reparations, which I think some people misunderstand. It's actually to just do a study to find out if they can afford to actually pay reparations. It's not actually to pay them. So it's another prolonged process. And I was actually listening to it, and I forget the Congress member's name, but he misquoted Martin Luther King. And it's something that I feel like white people do quite often, because he used the quote, he who gets behind in a race must run forever, stay behind, or run faster than the man ahead of him. But he ended that, but he didn't include the last part that Martin Luther King actually said, which was, that is our dilemma, which Martin Luther King was pointing out the disparities in income and the fact that we don't actually make it an even playing field. And my question is more so, how do you feel when they use black figures and misquote them to kind of push their agendas? How does that resonate, and how does that impact you in terms of your writing?
I absolutely love it. I find it thrilling, and it's terrible. It's terrible. One of the things that happens though is we don't control anything. We have our minds, and we have our art, and we have our our philosophy and our thinking, but we don't have any ability to really. I guess anybody could be misquoted, but I think we get that more than we find our words co-opted more than anybody. It's enraging. It's enraging. It's a condition of not really having power and the ability to call people to account.
So I asked my friend also to help me with this question, but so you've been criticized by Sam Harris and Thomas Charleston Williams as painting a very dim future for African Americans, one in which Sam Harris, one in which disempowering and reduces agency, and it seems the only way forward is for a revolution of sorts. So I'm curious, why black electorates slide towards more centrist candidates rather than more revolutionary figures like Bernie Sanders.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that felt like two questions. So which are you?
More the politics side. You could look at like South Carolina or the Super Tuesday sweep.
Yeah. I think black people have a very high political IQ. And I think black people often know white people better than white people know themselves. I think they often know white politicians better than white politicians know themselves. I think people know my politics. I think, although I got into trouble last time I did this, so I won't do it again, but I think you can guess who I'm gonna vote for in the primary. It probably won't matter by then, but you know what I mean? I think you can, pretty much guess. What I will say is, even having those politics, the left in this country has a very, very long history of regarding black people and the black struggle as inconvenient, as something to be talked over. I mean, I'll just give you an example. Look, I'm just, you asked, so I'm gonna be completely real with you about this. After Trump won, I watched Bernie Sanders go on Chris Hayes' show, and somebody asked Bernie, why did Trump win? Chris asked Bernie, why did Trump win? And you can, Google this. Bernie said it was because people were tired of political correctness. Really? Really? This is a guy who won basically telling the previous president to go back to Africa. How do you think that make black folks feel? How are we supposed to, regard that? I had my own, and I'll just put, my stuff aside. Bernie was at and I'm not trying to, come down, because this is just an emblem of a sort of thing that happens. Bernie was given a talk, I guess shortly after that. Young, Hispanic woman, Latino woman stood up, said, she wanted to, she was inspired by Sotomayor. And Bernie went on this whole thing about how, identity politics, this, and it's not enough to, want to, aspire to be, somebody just because, you're a member of a certain ethnic group. How do you think that made that young woman feel? And we're watching that. You know what I mean? We're actually watching that. And so, look, I'm no fan of Joe Biden. I think when people start seeing the clips that come out, and I just want to be real clear about this, when people start seeing the clips that come out, in terms of Joe Biden and mass incarceration, they're going to be stunned. It's worse than you think. I know that because I did a piece on mass incarceration. I had to actually read. It's bad. I was talking to a buddy today, and he was saying, listen, I'm sorry to take it in this direction. Every bad decision that Democrats have made over the past 20 or 30 years, you can see Joe Biden being on that side. It's terrible. It's terrible. So people, but I'm saying that not to criticize black folks in South Carolina. That's not a statement of great faith in Joe Biden. You understand? That's an understanding of what America actually is. We are next to Native Americans, and I guess next to the people on the Mayflower, the oldest ethnic group in this country. We, have been dealing with American politics for a very, very, very long time. And so I get why, a lot of young people are thrilled, by the platform. I'm thrilled by the platform. I get no thrill from watching, Joe Biden talk about, how it was better when he, was able to negotiate with segregationists. Nobody feels good about that. Nobody's cheering that on. But when you see people who have the most at stake, who are going to suffer the most, least willing to put it all on the line, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's really easy to, say, hey, I'm willing to, back a revolutionary candidate, overthrow everything. You know what I mean? From a position of comfort. You know what I mean? I saw a guy, he was tweeting out, this was a couple of weeks ago, if it's not Bernie, I'm not going to vote for anybody. Well, that's easy for you to say. I'm not meaning you specifically, but I'm saying that's when you have nothing at stake, when it's not, you know what I mean, your kid that's going to end up in a cage. You know what I'm saying? That's real easy to say. When you don't have, you know, relatives, you know, who come from, you know, one of these quote unquote shithole countries, real easy to say. You know, when you ain't on the, you know, the list of, you know, the Muslim banned countries, real easy to say. You know what I mean? When it ain't your kid who Trump is talking about when he's telling, you know, police officers to, you know, ram their head into the, that's real easy to say. You know, these black folks, man, they got stuff on the line. They got kids to feed. They got actual things to worry about. And so I don't wish we would soften up our politics. Look, I'm the dude, you know, advocating for reparations. I don't wish, you know what I mean? That's not a plea to be more moderate, but I think people should be really sympathetic and really understanding about what you're asking folks to do. You know, when you come in and you say, you know what I mean, look, you know, we need to start talking about revolution. I mean, you got to be real clear about what people are risking.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Sorry, that was a tangent. Sorry, forgive me. Did I kill the Q&A?
Okay, my second question actually has to do with the answer.
Wait, hold up. You can ask another question, I promise you, but I want somebody who did not get to ask a question.
Okay, yeah. We waited before I asked my second question. It's about the when you were at history.
Wait, but can you let somebody else ask, and then we'll come back to you, okay? I just want to make sure everybody who wanted to ask gets to ask, okay? Okay, all right. Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
I didn't mean to be rude either. I promise I'll come back to you. Okay.
Thank you for giving me the space to talk. One of my favorite pieces is your response to that writer from the Chappelle show. And then you got this quote where it's like the best, I don't even think you said the best black writer. You're just like the best writers, period, right now are like working in grocery shops. Like,
oh my God, that was like 8 years ago I wrote that.
But I love that piece though.
Wow.
Cause I hated that dude, for real. But like, I just, cause it's just.
He thinks he knows.
That's what I'm saying, like, what you talking about?
Yeah.
But just, I'm sorry if this is not a real question, but I guess I'm just asking for advice as a young black writer who I guess is privileged enough to have this scholarship to go here. Yeah. I often think about the other black writers who are just as talented as me, like not even that are that far away from me. Like I'm talking about like people I know who have to go to CUNYs, who don't have the same resources. Like I almost don't even want to write because I'm like, I'm not as talented as my peers, yet I'm the one who's here. Like, maybe I'm asking too much for advice on how to mitigate that guilt. And I kind of don't even want to do it in this forum, but I just wanted to, I don't know when's the next time I'll speak to you.
What year you in?
I'm a freshman.
Okay, so I'm gonna urge you to do a semester abroad at a HBCU.
I was just about to do that.
Okay,
but
that's great. That's great. I think context has a lot to do with feeling that way, and that's no disrespect to NYU or anywhere, but I think like sometimes when we're not around, we're not completely immersed in a community of folks. It can lead to some dissonance on that. I don't think feeling guilty for things that are outside of your control is going to solve anything. I think, on the contrary, it probably gets in the way. I think you should think really, really hard about how you can use the privilege you have being here and having exposure and having access to this great educational institution. I think you should think really, really hard about how you can use that to advance the morality that you feel. Like, you don't like the way the world is, you don't like your friends who you feel like are smart and can certainly benefit, or as smart, who's to say smarter, as smart certainly, who could benefit from this opportunity. I mean, the obligation then is to work toward a world where your kids and your grandkids don't have to deal with the same thing. And so, like, I think you got to be real, real strategic about that. So, like, for instance, like, where I here and where I had my freshman year, I don't know, like it would be really, really important for me to learn a foreign language. I know that sounds like out of left field, but it's actually not. You know what I mean? Because like for me as a writer, like foreign language means the ability to communicate with more people. It's the ability to see language. You know, as a black person, it's the ability to communicate, you know, depending on which language you pick. You pick French, now you're talking to almost 70% of black people, you know, on the planet. So I would think like with absolute, I would almost be ruthless, which is not to say don't have imagination, but it's such a, man, being in college is such a privilege and such an opportunity. It was like the only period in my life where I was like free to like read whatever. I used to just go sit in the library and just like get lost in the stacks. That will never happen again. Like it just, I've been trying to organize my life to make it happen again. But it takes a tremendous amount of will and a lot of saying no. And you just don't have to do that, you know, at this period. So yeah, I think that, and I think, you know, whatever your passion is, I think you gotta figure out how to angle that towards your politics and towards, you know, something that's more, look, I love to write. I would love to write even if I didn't have the politics I have. But having the politics I had, it was clear how I could use it, you know what I mean, to actually advance, you know, a vision of the world that I wanted to see.
Yeah. Just while I have the mic, I wanted to say I did visit Howard, fortunately, with my scholarship program. And at the time, I was reading your stuff, and I just wrote like a little response, like, towards your feelings about Howard, towards like my brief moment there. If I ever take a class with you, I'm gonna show that to you.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that. Sorry,
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hi. So I wanted to ask a question about writing communities, because something that this young brother said really kind of resonated with me, and the question I was going to ask. I wanted to say, first of all, like some of the best writing mentors I ever had never touched academia. You know, you just have to kind of seek them out. At the same time, Tony Kane Bombara came out of CUNY, right? So there's so many different places to find it, and
That's true.
you know what I'm saying? And it's a thing that we always constantly have to work on, right? Even
That's
if,
true.
and I'm an administrator here. I'm not a professor. I'm not a student, but there's poets all over the 4th floor of Cooper Square. You know what I mean? Like we're literally everywhere. I wanted to ask a question about your writing community because I was reading a piece the other day on Black Panther, and the community that you came out of included writers that I've crossed paths with in my day and who are really amazing. Joel Diaz-Porter, Iona Harvey, Terrence Hayes, that whole DC crew that I kind of wish I was part of, and that I'm constantly trying to recreate. So you also mentioned the poet Henry.
If you recreated it, you wouldn't know it when it was happening. That's the trap.
No, that's the thing, right?
Like you wouldn't know that it was actually a beautiful thing. You know?
It's also organic. I have a crew of writers that we just kind of bounce their ideas around with it. It's just like that. So I feel you on that. You were mentioning the poet Henry Dumas, right, as the inspiration for Black Panther #3, and I'm just kind of wondering if you still are in touch with that particular community of guys and women. If there's a writing community that you turn to, particularly, you know, noting everything we talked about as far as reparations and the state of politics, which is extremely depressing. Is there a community that you still turn to that revives you in any way, or that kind of reminds you why you do the things that you do?
Yes, very much. I just talked to Yona. I have a text I had to return from Yona, so I talk to her fairly regularly. Somebody who else was a part of that crew, although this never gets said, people don't know this, is Jelani Cobb, who's actually up at Columbia. You know, he was, you know, somebody I met, and, you know, me and him have, you know, been, you know, great friends, you know, ever since. So yeah, I am. And I thought what you said about academia was really, really important. Like Joel was really, you know, significant for me. He was homeless at the time. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? He was the one that introduced me to Henry Dumas, introduced me to Robert Hayden, you know, Lucille Cliff, all of that. You know what I mean? You know, from this dude that was a genius. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really, really important addition. I mean, one of the beautiful things about being at NYU, and I'm sure NYU knows this, is not just being at NYU, but being in New York. you know, for me, and so I was at Howard, but I was like also in DC. I was also in Chocolate City, and so it was this tremendous, you know, time for me to, you know, experience, you know, all of these things that I really hadn't before, you know. So yeah, no, I do. I very much do have a community. It's probably smaller now than it was then, but that's just, you know, what happens, you know. But yeah, no, and it's very important.
Hi. So a lot of us in this corner are from the UConn School of Social Work, and so we are in a micro practice, so kind of being in neighborhoods and working with clients from all walks of life. And I'm interested to kind of see if you have any thoughts on how what you said about journalism and the role media plays and news plays earlier. I thought that was very interesting, but if you had any thoughts how we can kind of bring that to the level where we are working with clients day to day that are struggling with these issues, who I find a lot of my clients are just so overwhelmed by all the information that's out there and everything. They see it as a thing that they don't have time for. They don't have time to read articles in the New York Times. They don't have time to educate themselves on these issues. And what we can do as workers to kind of tie it all together, because it is stuff that affects them.
I mean, they probably don't have time. Like, they're not, like, that's not a statement of, like, value about information. They probably, you know, literally don't have time. I don't know, because I think about that one a lot, right? Because you know, I was talking about the people who don't, you know, who legit don't want to know, and that's a real thing. But it's also, I mean, you know, the more sympathetic way of looking at it, there certainly is a slice of America that just cannot keep up because, you know, they got kids to feed. You know what I mean? And when you have, I mean, this is the real damage of having a president of the United States. It's like we're gonna have a vaccine in 3 months. Like, everybody don't have time to, you know, figure out that that's total BS, you know? So I really don't know what to do in that situation because it's actually a broader systemic reason for why there is, you know, that's the way it is in the first place. So, yeah, I'm sorry I can't be much help there. We don't know either. Yeah. It's a real thing, it's a difficult thing.
You talk a lot in many pieces, but also from your personal experience about the inequality in the public education system in our country. And I personally think that's like one of the fundamental issues and like so many broader issues. That's like the seed. And I want to know if you have any like, not opinion, but like suggestions on how to fix that, or like I'm listening to a lot of the Democratic presidential, not nominees, but candidates talk about their solutions, and I'm just like not really seeing that much.
Yeah, it's probably because it's.
I know it's a hard issue. Like there isn't a clear answer, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought a little about this, and I think obviously education and wealth should probably be decoupled from each other. You know, part of that, you know, is, you know, maybe property tax. Part of that is, you know, the idea that because you live in a certain neighborhood, you get to attend, you know, a wealthier neighborhood. I had a buddy want to actually propose this radical idea that private schools should be totally abolished. That private school in and of itself, you know, is actually immoral because it allows some people to check out of the system. I don't know, man, because I don't, like when I think about like like my time in school, it was just so unsafe. Like, forget like teacher quality, curriculum, all of that. It was just literally just so unsafe. And it felt like the schools, were being asked to compensate for like the failings of society. You know, I got this buddy, Eve Ewing, she wrote this book, Ghosts in the Schoolyard. It's a great book. It's about school closings in Chicago. But the first thing you realize when you read the book is the schools, like, people get in front of cameras and they say things, and this goes back to the information gap. People get and they say, well, this school is quote unquote failing, so I should be able to close it, right? And that kind of makes a kind of sense. Well, school's not doing its job, so we should close it. But what people don't realize is in many of these communities, the schools are the last social service provider that's still operating that's not the police, okay? So school, like, you know, I didn't eat breakfast, school. You know what I mean? I might not get Christmas gifts. School, teacher. You know what I mean? And so when you start stripping away, you know, those sorts of things, it's actually an attack on the community in and of itself. To say nothing about what institutions mean and traditions mean, you know what I mean? And attacking, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, I don't have much in the way of immediate solutions. I strongly suspect, though, it requires something much, much more radical. Because the schools exist as a node of something else. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's probably pretty hard to say, you know, fix this one thing independently. And I think, like, it's almost certainly, you know, connected to these kind of, you know, broader issues of wealth, for instance.
Thank you so much for your talk, Professor Coates. My name is Alan McFarland. I went to Pimlico Junior High School.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
I went to Lamel.
Is that right?
That's what I'm talking about, like when I'm talking about unsafe. Yeah,
Right.
Pimlico. Wow.
Yeah, my dad lived over on
Y'all don't know.
West Forest Park,
Wow.
Garrison Boulevard, so I know what
Y'all
you
have
mean.
no idea.
I'm
I
born and
used to-
raised in Baltimore.
Man, I used to live on Barrington and Garrison, and then I moved down to
Right.
Talga Parkway across from Mondawmin.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, Mondawmin. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the mall, y'all. That's the mall. So here's my question. In Between the World and Me, one of the things that stuck out for me from your novel is when you talked about the love you had for your family. And I think the love that black men have in our society is never really talked about.
Right.
That level of empathy and capacity, and it's so overshadowed by all the other noise. And could you speak to that? Could you speak about that part of the humanity that never gets any airplay?
Yeah, it was an intentional decision, and I think I don't know. I think for whatever reason, you know, when the larger culture depicts us and when we depict ourselves, there's a kind of macho thing that we do. And I can just only speak for myself. Like, that just was never true of me. I just wasn't that guy. And so it was almost natural for me to speak like that. You know, it was almost natural. Like, I mean, my mom and my dad, my brothers and sisters, I mean, that was so important to me, you know, in terms of my development. It very much saved me. You know, when I came to New York, I mean, it was really my son and my wife that saved me again, because I think a lot of times, some of us, and I would say, you know, young men specifically, because of how we're socialized, will often do many horrible things and will put ourselves at horrible, horrible risk. And in having a family, and I'm not saying everybody should do this, because I was really young, but it's what I did. In having a family, like, and in understanding that my safety was tied to somebody else's safety, that if I went out and got drunk and did X, Y, and Z, like, other people might pay for that. It was really grounding. You know what I mean? And that was like how family always served to me. It curbed my worst impulses, because it was somebody else who, and I guess that's what love is supposed to do. You know what I mean? Like, it was always somebody else who was at stake. I don't think I'm the only person that thinks that. I know I'm not the only black dude that thinks that. You know what I mean? Because I had those conversations. But I don't know. There's like a way that we feel like we have to depict ourselves as the hardest, the baddest, the biggest. You know, like I said, that wasn't me. You know, I was like when I first heard like Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City, I was like, that's me. That was me. Even though I was in my 30s by then, I was like, that was who I was. That kid right there. You know what I mean? I wasn't, you know, kicking the door, waving the 4-4. I just wasn't, and didn't want to be. Like, I'm fine. Like, I don't even aspire to that. You know, not like I wish I could be that. You know? And so I really felt like any sort of writing that people was gonna, like, first of all, I knew I wasn't alone. That was the other thing. Like, I wasn't confused about that. But I felt like any sort of writing that people was gonna feel, it had to be true. You know what I mean? Like, it had to come from how I actually saw myself and how I existed, you know, within the ecology. Even from being from a rough place, like, who was I? You know, I couldn't come out like I was Bully on the block, you know?
I think we have time for just one more.
So wait, I gotta go back to old girl, who, cause she's gonna be mad. So I'm gonna let her ask her question, and then we're gonna give her a +1.
Well, my question is more so, because I remember at the talk you said that you've never been to Africa and that you do live in Paris. And something I always found that was interesting is when black people moved to Paris to run away from racism in America, but racism comes from Europe. It comes from France, and that's why Africans in Africa speak French, is because they came and colonized it. So why would you move from one racist country to one that was also just as racist?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, my life is not about escape. Like, I didn't go, I didn't go to Paris to feel like there was no racism. I went to Paris because my wife always dreamed of living in Paris. You know, she's raised on all of these movies, which I can't even name now, but she always dreamed of living in Paris. And I wanted my son to be fluent in French. Like, those were like the dominating, you know, overarching things. It's also one of the blackest cities in the world, which I didn't know until I visited. Like, there are black people everywhere. So I didn't like feel, like I didn't have trouble finding community there. You know what I mean? For me, racism is just another species of power. It would not be my expectation that when I go to Africa, wherever I go, Senegal, Ghana, that even then that there'll be any escape from that. You know? Now you can, you know, maybe the power refracts differently in a different society. Even in France, racism actually refracts differently than it does here in America, which is not to say it's more or less racist. I'm just saying the way it lands is very, very different than it does. Like, it means something, for instance, to live in say, a racist society where, like, guns are prevalent, as opposed to living in one where it's not. Like, the whole, you know, way it goes down is just totally, totally different. So I don't know, man. I don't have much hope for going places and escaping from power. I think that's a very, very human thing. I think if there were no racism and I was in Africa, I think I quickly would find myself on the side of people who, you know, were oppressed. You know, whether it's race or not. You know, like when I speak on this because this is the vector of power that has most impacted my life and the one that I know the most intimately. But not because I think it's the only one, or I think if we defeated this one, there would be no more. So I don't know. You know, I also think within reason and within safety, you know, we shouldn't avoid societies that we, you know to be racist. I just don't think that's particularly smart. You know what I mean? I think, you know, we should, you know, see as much of the world as we can, you know, and understanding, you know, what we're seeing. You know, you can't, you know, walk in a museum and, you know, you can't walk through the city and admire the riches and, you know, of a city like Paris and not think of Haiti. You know what I mean? As long as you're thinking of that, I think it's okay. As long as you know, what you're seeing and are not confused. And don't think, you know what I mean, you've come to, you know, some, you know, post-racist heaven. You know, I think you'll be okay. You see them back here, right?
Yeah, we'll just take this last one.
So I'm a doctoral student here in the Department of History, and I write about slavery and emancipation. And a lot of your work leverages the works of historians. So I'm wondering, what kind of writing tips would you give someone like myself, a black student, who wants to write, but write academically, right, get published and stuff like that? So what kind of writing tips would you have that may not always lend itself towards journalism?
I don't know, man, because I feel like the things I would say, I don't know. Like, I get the sense that within certain fields of academia, there's a language. And I would probably tell you, if you're in my class, that is not a language that is good for communicating ideas to broad groups of people. But maybe that's not the intention. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Like, for me, like, I feel like there should be writing classes for sociologists and historians and economists. Like, I think that. But I can't tell how much of that is, like, not writing with clarity versus observing the conventions of the field. I'll give you an example. When I was working on, actually, my mass incarceration piece, when I was working on Case for Reparations, I guess a lot of work, people who write in academia tend to be much more hesitant about their conclusions. This would seem to indicate, this would tell us, we did not find much evidence of. had only a minor impact. Or, you know what I mean? Like language that is like hedging. And like, the first thing if you was in my class, I say cut that out. Say what you saw. Say what you saw, stand on it, and prepared to be, prepared to fight. And if you're wrong, you're wrong. That's just what it is. But then, the kids I'm teaching don't have to worry about like getting tenure, right? Like them being wrong won't necessarily impact that. So I don't know. Like, I don't know that would be particularly good advice, for a doctoral student who, hopes to make their way in the field. As a general critique of language, I always think like that sort of thing gets in the way. You know what I mean? Because we know what you said. We know what you're trying to say anyway. So why are you taking up more words to actually say it? You know what I mean? But the conventions of the field are what the conventions of the field are. So I would be hesitant to, tell you to necessarily listen to the rules that I would establish in my own.
Well, that's it. Again, I want to say thank you so much, Ta-Nehisi, for being here. This was incredible, and thank you to all of you. Just so you know, we are selling some copies of The Water Dancer over at that table right on the left. There are 2 representatives who work at WSN who would be happy to get you a copy. I think we have a few more left. There's also still drinks and cheese and stuff, so you guys feel free. But yeah, I don't really know how to conclude it, but that's it. So thank you all so much.
Thank you guys. Thank you.